Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very accomplished professional from Perth, Australia, Bethan Winn. Bethan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Bethan is the Director of Critical Thinking, Facilitator, and a consultant. So, Bethan, tell me a little bit about your own journey in brief.
Oh, well, I'm originally from Wales in the UK. I've lived in Perth 12 years, and my background's in teaching and education. So I was a high school teacher in London, university teacher over here in Perth, and then about 3.5 years ago, I started my own business, taking critical thinking out of the classroom and making it accessible to people in professional environments or to help them with their personal lives.
Fantastic. And as a critical thinking and human skills facilitator, tell me about the kind of work you are doing, and please give an example.
I work with a wide variety of clients, many of whom at the moment are in professional services, such as lawyers, accountants, a lot of government departments here in Western Australia, but, you know, covering all sorts of different backgrounds and professions. And it ranges from giving a keynote talk at a conference through to I have a team that I work with regularly. You know, I coach everyone on the team and I go in and I deliver training once a month, and there's a few arrangements like that. So there's that ongoing development of skills and reminder, or fitting into a broader professional and personal development package that someone else is delivering.
Amazing. And how do you define critical thinking?
My definition is that it's skills, knowledge, and attitudes. So the skills might be things like the ability to evaluate information, the ability to withhold judgment, the ability to pause before reacting to something, knowledge of things like logical fallacies, which are often, you know, unfamiliar to people, but just understanding little tricks of argument, and then being able to identify where people use them in marketing or in politics or even in the stories we tell ourselves. And then the attitudes are things like openness and curiosity, a willingness to learn and to grow and to change our opinions, because the reality is that you and I and everyone listening is right about some things, and we're also wrong about some things.
Correct.
And figuring out what those are sometimes takes us a very, very long time, if ever.
I fully understand that. You know, when I was reading about you also, Bethan, it was fascinating to read that you are a leading voice in future-ready thinking skills. Help me understand now, what is future-ready thinking skills? And is there a difference between critical thinking skills and future-ready skills?
Well, I suppose it's highlighting the fact that the World Economic Forum and similar bodies again and again highlight the importance of critical thinking. And the irony, I suppose, is that this is somewhat ancient philosophy. You know, the concepts haven't changed, but I think the environment that we're living in now, you know, the ability to focus, the ability to take a step back and think critically, or to be creative and to come up with unique ideas. These are all essential skills. And, you know, you mentioned just before we started about, you know, the number of us on TikTok and Instagram, that instant gratification of those platforms.
Correct.
And finding it hard to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. And it's really, really valuable to be able to do that. And to have that self-awareness as well, not just reacting to what's around us, but taking the time to respond in a considered manner. It's very important.
But when you say future ready, what goes into developing something that you would refer to as a future ready thinking skill?
I suppose it's preparing us. Like, we live in, you may have heard the acronym VUCA before, you know, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And the world is not getting any simpler. And I feel like the pace with which, you know, technology is evolving, with which the workplace is evolving and how we work is evolving is so fast that it's hard to make good decisions when you're in a reactive mode. But the reality is we need to understand how we're thinking, what we're thinking, why we're thinking certain ways more and more for us to be effective as we move into the future, I suppose.
Right. Right.
Sounds
Right.
quite, I don't know, postmodern somehow.
Yeah. Well said.
Meta.
Well said. Great response. Thank you. My next question to you is, what are some of the challenges people face when it comes to critical thinking?
Some of the challenges that we all face is, I think, being busy. We're all subject to so much information all day, every day. So just being able to take a step back to understand the impact of being in this, everything is important and everything is urgent mode, really inhibits our ability to make good decisions. And it's not to say that we need to think critically about every decision we ever make, because it's just not possible. I like Daniel Kahneman's work around system 1 thinking, system 2 thinking. So system 1 being quite reactive, quite biased, instant response, and the system 2 being more thoughtful and considered. And I observe in clients all the time, they really struggle to tap into that system 1, that slower way of thinking. But we need to be there in order to make good decisions. We need to be able to take that step back. And even if the decision that you reach in each thinking system might be the same, at least in system 2, you've thought it through a bit more. And if you were to look back, you can say, oh, I know why I did that now. And I've got good reasons. And when you're working in a large organization, you often need to persuade other people why your choice is a good one, or why they should go with what you say. So being able to offer a considered response to that is really, really important in a corporate environment, or even within a family,
And how do you approach facilitating other people in your sessions on critical thinking?
So my approach, coming from education, it's all about maintaining the energy, keeping it lively, keeping it very relevant. So whichever industry I'm in, often in advance or in the room, I'll ask people, what are some decisions or problems or challenges people have that are front of mind? So it's all about applying the information immediately. I joked a while ago with someone, like, if I don't think people can use it straight away, as soon as they leave the room, or even apply it while they're there, then I tend not to put it in a session. I think it's really important that people can see the value straight away, and that they walk away feeling a sense of clarity and confidence, perhaps in the decisions they're trying to make, or at least in the tools and how they will use them moving forward. It's very, very practical.
No, that's fantastic. And, when you go sit with a number of participants in your sessions, there must be participants at different levels of development, and there must be some people who are fairly cynical as well. How do you handle difficult participants?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. I think understanding why people are there is very useful. I found this particularly when I used to deliver sessions on behalf of, for example, an Institute of Management here in Western Australia. Some people would be sent there against their will almost. So at least knowing that and just, sitting with people. And this is why in those scenarios where you have a diverse range of abilities, skills, industries, it's useful for the group not to be too big if you really want to get value for people, because then you can at least spend some time to go, okay, why are you here? What are you hoping to get out of the day? And if need be, pulling someone aside and saying, you seem a bit disengaged. Is there anything you'd like to share? But I've been doing it long enough that I know that, we will have a little talk at the beginning about ownership. You get out what you put in, and people can come feeling defensive or guarded or have their own stuff going on, and we all do. So I try not to take that personally. We always try and remove the ego from the situation, and just try and build that rapport and get people to open up. And it can be difficult if they're with their work team, but sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse.
I agree. But the other thing that I want, when I was reading about you, I was also wondering that culture, and there's an organizational culture, but yet we come from different cultures in our own homes. How does culture in a large group impact critical thinking facilitation?
That's a good question. Well, I think of culture with a big C as being, country cultures, and then culture with a small c, I would refer to as like workplace culture. Of course, it's going to have an impact. And I often share a story of, a person in a red country. Everything is red. The sheep are red, the houses are red, the sky is red, and a blue country. Everything is blue. The sheep are blue, the sky is blue, everything's blue. And someone from the red country visiting the blue country and feeling that they really understand, they know everything, they have all the knowledge, the language. They come back to the red country and people say, "What's it like?" And they say, "Everything is purple." You're like, "Oh, okay. Hang on. We can never fully remove our culture, and even someone else from Wales will have a different culture to my own culture. My culture is different to my Australian colleagues. And so that self-awareness and being aware of, every single thing that we've experienced, every part of who we are that leads up to now, this very moment, will influence how we see what's around us. And confirmation bias, desirability bias will all be kicking in to reinforce that. We will see what we want to see. And that will be reinforced by our culture to some extent. So it does impact it. I find Hofstede's work very interesting on this, Hofstede's model of culture. And it comes into, if we talk about difficult conversation, the power distance between yourself and your manager, for example, or yourself and a parent, the expectation of how quickly something should be resolved. Are they short-term or long-term thinkers? So it's really interesting and a huge conversation that I'd love to dive into more.
I agree. Maybe we'll schedule something on culture, because I'm also fascinated with culture across so many different topics. But moving on, Bethan, I also wanted to ask you about technology. And we're all raving about ChatGPT these days.
Oh yes.
How do technologies like ChatGPT impact critical thinking? I mean, now people are saying just ask a question and you get a response.
Okay, so how ChatGPT? I think those tools have their place, but it's really important to remember, getting a definitive, you don't get a definitive answer from AI. You get a version of an answer. So as with anything, like we would with Google search, right? You wouldn't necessarily take the first response as correct, or you shouldn't. It depends on how important the question is, perhaps. And I'm a huge advocate for people thinking for themselves. We often turn to, the Google search, the AI, the expert, or someone else to make a decision for us or to tell us what the right answer is. And I think we all are almost, we get addicted to the formula, the step-by-step guide. And the reality is that humans are messy, life is complex, and what is the right answer according to one person is not the right answer for someone else. So likewise with ChatGPT, it's a tool. It's not the answer to everything. It can be useful, but it shouldn't be used. It shouldn't be in isolation. And editing it and playing, seeing what it gives you, and then creating your own version of whatever that answer may be is definitely the way forward.
Thank you. My next question is, how do you measure the effectiveness of your facilitation?
Oh, it's a good question. In a day's training, we've got to manage expectations, right? There's only so much you can achieve, and we practice, we use tools, but I will often give people like a self-evaluation at the beginning of the day, and then we return to it at the end of the day. And it's always quite fun. It's not very scientific necessarily, but people often score themselves fairly highly in the beginning because they don't want to look stupid. Nobody likes to look stupid. And then at the end of the day, they come back and review. It's always gone up. Sometimes they reduce their morning score now that they know more. So the Dunning-Kruger effect kicks in, where we, our confidence level is high when our knowledge level is low. And the more we learn, the lower our confidence becomes until we become an expert at the other end. So that's, you know, a very simple tool. But to be honest, I think it's the groups where I work with people ongoing that, you know, you really see the impact. You see how they've developed over the course of a year, and how you know, they'll come to me and they say, I've made a decision and I thought, what would Bethan do? And I think, oh gosh, I'm not insured for this. But you know, just them thinking about the process of decision making, for example, is a sign that they are embedding that learning. And it's really lovely to see that and see the confidence and the clarity people are getting when they're employing those critical thinking frameworks.
Very interesting. You know, some many years ago, I had attended a session on critical thinking, and one of the challenges that I found was that because of the difference in different people, you know, of people from the organization and the hierarchical situation that existed within the room, there was a challenge that was being faced in how does one include everybody. So my question is, how do you foster a supportive and inclusive environment in all the participants?
I understand what you're saying completely, and it does cause challenges, because when you've got senior people in the room, you know, they may not intimidate me, but they may intimidate junior members of the team. And I think this is where, you know, the critical thinking and human skills go hand in hand, because in order to build that trust, you need connection. You need people to see the other people in the room as just another human being. And that's how I do it, right? If I meet a CEO or a CFO or a director, I almost like delete the job title and I go, who is the human in front of me? Who is this person? What makes them smile? What brings them joy? What's important to them? So I encourage people to have those conversations. Sometimes you do need to remove the most senior people if you want to have a really honest conversation.
Yes.
And I often, particularly in a brainstorm situation, you know, we don't do our best thinking when somebody is stood in front of us saying, do some good thinking right now. We do our best thinking while we're walking, while we're in the shower, while we're driving, while we're on the bus. So I try and allow people alternative ways to offer input, you know, after a session or privately to me, you know, through a Google form or other products exist, Dropform, whatever. But having alternatives ways to input, because the reality is, even if everybody in the room is feeling very comfortable with each other and has that trust, they may not actually think of the thing that they really want to say in the moment, and they may need more time. So that, I think that awareness is really important.
Also, I would imagine, you know, the organization must have a very secure culture for someone who, you know, for a group of junior managers to be able to actually talk about critical thinking, especially when the boss is around.
Yes, absolutely. It's definitely been a challenge. I find particularly, you know, maybe at the end of the day, someone will say, I love this, I love these frameworks, I love these tools, I feel really empowered, but I'm not allowed to actually make decisions at work. So then it becomes a conversation around influence and communication. And to be honest, sometimes it does mean that working with a smaller organization can be more rewarding, because you can see the results more immediately. But we all know that for people to graduate to leadership, you don't get into a leadership position when you are not able to think critically, strategically, creatively. You need those skills. And I've seen this a lot as people rise up, like new level, new devil. It's like we spend a lot of time when people are young, getting them to fit into the box, to follow the rules, to you know, follow the process someone else has decided, and then we reward that. And then as we grow up and we, you know, enter the workplace and we become more senior, we need to then undo a lot of that training that we've been you know, we spent our whole lives following instructions, and suddenly there's no instruction manual and we need to make some tough choices. So that's where critical thinking really comes to the
fore. So what I'm hearing you say is that a culture of this is how it happens here. will not ever be able to promote critical thinking, isn't it?
Well, and this is the challenge. I saw a great comment by Adam Grant recently. It's like, if you are having to go externally from your business to hire people into senior roles, it means you're not developing your teams well enough. You're not investing in the individuals that you have who have the knowledge and have the experience. You just haven't developed their skills to the right level to raise them up. And so the ideal is that we develop people from within the family, as it were, for them to be ready to rise to the next level. And it's a challenge. It is a challenge.
Yeah, I agree. So, Bethan, I have time for two more questions. My next question to you is about the young leaders. I'm from the boomers generation, but the millennials and the Gen Zs, I've now started to get into positions of influence in most organizations. And I do believe that these young leaders have brought in a breath of fresh air into most organizations.
Yeah.
How do they react to sessions on critical thinking? Because they have a very, very different and a very unique mindset.
Interesting. It's hard to look at a group as a homogenous whole, everybody of this age. But it is very interesting. Some struggle with saying, I don't know, because I think, one of the reasons that they probably have been promoted is that they seem competent and confident. And so whether that is publicly or privately to me saying, I'm scared, I don't know, I'm worried about looking stupid or failing. So that's very common. And I think there's some interesting conversations around the imposter syndrome that happens. And I think it's a good thing in many ways. Like we do tend to work harder and do better work when we're worried about failing. Correct. And we don't want people to be blasé. I think one of the challenges is being heard, particularly, Western Australia, there's a lot of mining companies here. It's a very sort of male dominated, there's a lot of work to try and change that. But a friend of mine said the other day, she was in a room and there was 15 white men in blue shirts and her in this meeting. Oh my gosh. So there's still a lot of work to be done. But I think the balance here is tricky between bringing a diverse perspective, challenging the status quo, and then people wanting someone to not be too difficult, because then it's awkward. And there's no right answer, but it's important to have those conversations and to keep that dialogue going. Definitely.
Well said. And my last question to you, Bethan, and this is for the thousands of people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your deep understanding of critical thinking, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away from your own journey, your own knowledge, and from our conversation?
Oh, wow. 3 lessons. I think firstly, give your brain room to breathe, whatever that looks like. Unplug, make sure your phone is not the first thing you look at in the morning and the last thing you look at night. Give your brain some room to breathe.
Wonderful. Okay.
Secondly, from my own journey, I think self-awareness is huge. Like, we can learn about biases and fallacies and their influence on us, but our own experiences and our background and our upbringing is huge. So the more we learn about that, the more we'll understand ourselves and appreciate other people and why they are who they are and why they do what they do as well.
Correct.
And I suppose I always come back to not falling into what's called a false dichotomy. We often see things as black and white, or it's A or it's B, it's this or it's that. And the reality is that life is not binary. There's not a right answer and a wrong answer. There are myriad ways to navigate choices in life and business or whatever your viewers might be doing. So look for the alternative paths and look for a win-win where possible. And I firmly believe with the right mindset and the right attitudes, you can find those win-wins.
Wonderful. And on that note, and your 3 amazing lessons, I love the first one, give your brain room to breathe. Second, you said was self-awareness is huge. And then third one you said was about the false dichotomy. Life is not bounded, binary. There is, these are my words, there is a gray in it.
Yes,
And you also
absolutely.
said, look for a win-win. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for talking to me about your own journey. Thank you for talking to me at such length about critical thinking. I learned many, many new things from you today.
Oh,
Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck.
Thank you so much. Absolute pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.